going down to San Diego?
Rounds. It's almost a mile a minute.
A good never-ending.
No, it's good. But I have to
have remote mics. We got two.
Space Park show.
So this is already on? Once we
That's
start,
a longer drive than we had, too.
Yeah, well, this one has otherwise, it would have been Jesse.
it's already on. Once we start, and you guys need water?
I got this.
I've got So anything new with the emporium?
Well,
Is it still emporicizing? Okay. Is it still emporicizing? Yeah, it's made up word. So you can make it do whatever you want it to do.
people are always I mean, we sort of we shifted the whole place to focus on art shows.
Oh?
We had a local artists commissions arts for auction to raise funds.
All right, I think we're ready to begin. In the Democratizing Space panel, we turn our attention to space activism. In the past decade, we have witnessed an amazing level of initiative and many successes in space-related activities from the private sector. It's clear that people can no longer wait for the future to happen and are taking matters into their own hands. The range of activities spans across the board from participatory unconferences to sophisticated satellites built by students. The panelists will discuss the next steps in providing inspiration and access to space activities to more people. The panel is moderated by Mr. Dennis Stone from NASA's Commercial Crew and Cargo Programs. But for this panel, he will wear his hat as the president of World Space Week Association. Mr. Stone will be introducing our distinguished panelists. Please welcome Mr. Dennis Stone.
Thank you very much. Hello again. I want to thank you all for coming to this panel. There's lots of revolutions, a lot of change going on. You know, the commercialization of space is one such revolution. The other is that we can all play a role. It used to be we'd sit in front of our TV sets and watch the astronauts go. But times have changed. There are so many ways to get involved, to play a role. Of course, going is the ultimate role, but there are many, many other things we can do in space, from launching a small satellite to being involved in great organizations such as this one, participating in events, and pushing your views and advocating your views. So we have a panel today that will touch upon all of these kinds of ways, and we'd like to welcome them. Starting on your right, we have Dr. Robert Twiggs, who's the professor of astronautical, I think I could say that, right? Astronautical engineering at Moorhead State University, and a real pioneer in small satellites. Then we have Jessie Clark, who's the founder and president of the San Diego Space Society and a leading space advocate, and he'll discuss several things that he's been working on. We have Ben Higginbotham, who's the Spacevidcast. He runs back and forth to the video a lot because he can multitask, right? Yes, there you go. He's really is a next-gen broadcast expert, and as well as an enthusiast of space and other forms of technology. So he's got lots of interesting things going on. Last but not least, my old friend Rick Tumlinson, a founder of the Space Frontier Foundation, under whose auspices we're all here today, founder of the Texas Space Alliance, and many things too numerous to mention. How's that? Is that fair enough? Okay. So I think we'll go down in order, and we'll start with Dr. Twiggs, talk about small satellites and so on.
Okay.
Thanks.
Can I stand up?
You can do anything you want.
Can I leave? This is my first time to this particular conference, and this is group of people which you normally don't see. You generally go talk to your peers, and I don't see many of my peers out here today. My background in satellites came in kind of a strange way. My initial introduction to space was really when I was going to college quite a few years ago, and we had Alan Shepard do his first suborbital flight, so you know I've been around it for quite a while. I have never been professionally in the aerospace industry. I've worked as an engineer in Silicon Valley for a number of years and then got involved in the educational system when I went to Utah, but one strange thing happened that a guy came to us one day and he said, how many of you faculty here in this school would like to get involved in building satellites? And I'd always been interested in space, and I raised my hand, and so did much of the other faculty. And we ended up with the students actually building a satellite, getting it launched, and the satellite worked. And I think the only good thing out of that you can say at the very beginning, it was not one of us, none of the faculty, of course none of the students, and none of the mentors that worked with us had ever built a satellite before. And we learned after the fact, this was an undergraduate liberal arts school, and we learned after the fact that when we volunteered that there were two other schools in the state that were the research schools, that one said, you know, I think this is too complex a problem for us, and I don't think we should do it. And the other one said, you know, we've worked on this for 3 years and it went nowhere. So, you know, we always say they brought it to us because we didn't know any different. And it turned out to be a marvelous, marvelous experience for all of the mentors, the students. It was such a terrific learning experience for the student. And we launched a satellite in 1985 out of the gas can on the Challenger called NewSat-1. And it had probably broken every rule that NASA had established to build satellites. They didn't know that we put stuff in it from the auto shop down the street because we couldn't find it anyplace else. The radio board in it wouldn't fit in the frame we had, so one of the guys one night says, I'm going to make this sucker fit. He laid it out on the table, took a hacksaw, cut it in two, put some insulation in between, turned it over, and made some jumpers on it. And you know, that sucker worked. People told us horror stories about what it took to build a satellite. And we finally got to the point that we weren't scared any longer, we just ignored them. But the thing I like about satellites and working on satellites from an educational perspective is that it is absolutely so fascinating to me to see what it does to students that work on them. They just really get turned on. They either get turned on or they just completely leave in about a week when you start working on them, because it isn't a well-defined problem. How many of you in here have not, let's say have not, heard of CubeSat? Oh, I see one hand. Okay, so the rest of you know about CubeSat. CubeSat come about, I was working at Stanford. I had worked at a school in California and had actually went to school at Stanford in my early years. I went back to work at Stanford to help start a small satellite program. And we built some of the larger microsatellites. We got them launched, but it took a long time. And you had to get just the right opportunity to get a launch with them. So decided after one of our launches we wanted to build something smaller. So we come up with a Beanie Baby box as the size we wanted to build it. So it was about 4 inches. And we decided that was the size we were going to build it, and we worked with Cal Poly to build a launcher for it. That was the beginning of CubeSat. And it started out a 4-inch box, but along about that time there was an interesting thing happened in the aerospace industry. There was a company called JPL and a company called Lockheed Martin built a Mars lander, I think it was, and it didn't land. And they found out that the problem was what? Can anybody remember? What was the problem? Dimensions. I don't really ever notice, but the CubeSat is a 10-centimeter cube, not a 4-inch cube. And that's the reason. I said, boy, it's about time students start learning metrics. And so we did that, and we have been cussed so many times for having something that's based around the metric system. And you'd be surprised when you do something like that. You do it for a particular reason. Our reason was we wanted something that the students could do, something that, one, is limit how much they could try and cram into that thing, and also find a way to get it launched cheaper. And I didn't think that the aerospace industry, and especially the amateur radio community, could be so cruel. I don't know how many people called me the stupidest guy around. And that's a toy. What do you want to make a toy for? How many people are playing with toys today? How many of you are playing with CubeSats? A few of you? I think it's one of the cool things that we never anticipated. How would you anticipate that somebody would say, I keep hearing them talk about it as a disruptive technology. You know, all I wanted to do was build a little satellite, you know? But it turned out great, and the thing that I like about it is, to me, it's so much fun because it is interdisciplinary. And we had a little problem. When things become popular, what happens to them? What happened to the price of getting a CubeSat launched? Anybody tell me? What happened? It went up, right? Started out at $40,000, and what is it today? $120,000 for a CubeSat, right? And they said it was too small to do anything good in, right? So now that they've jacked the price up, guess what we're going to do? Okay, here's the next one. Now, gripe all you want to, but you can put a lot of stuff in something this size. This is a 2.5 length, what we call pocket cube. And we're ready to launch this. This is the launcher. We're ready to launch this this year on a Russian rocket working with the University of Rome. But that isn't where I want to stop. I want to make satellites cheap, and I want to launch a lot of them. Particularly, I want to launch them off the ISS, and I want grade school kids to build them. So the next size after that is this. Okay? We call it a moonbeam. All right? And I do have free models of moonbeams up here. If anybody wants one, I got a whole package of them up here. You know, I bought them at Lucky's last night. So I'm going to leave it up here. And I think from listening to Mark's presentation at noon today, we ought to call it Audacity Sat. How does that sound? Is that a good name? But come up and get you a model of your next spacecraft. But think about this. What if a 4th grade student, one of his first projects, was to get one of these launched off the International Space Station? Do you think that kid would be hooked on science and engineering? I think so, and I think that's where we ought to start. But to me, that's what this whole space program about, is to energize students and get them excited about space and get things back like they were when we had the moon days. If you remember the excitement and everything there. But it's not going to do, it's going to do more than that. It's going to get them more excited. It's going to make their schooling a lot better. They'll find out why the heck they have mathematics that now is taught as a separate subject, you know, from their physics and all that kind of stuff. So I'm an advocate, and I'm going to quit right now, of space in education. I think it's one of the real possible things to do some really great stuff for students. And it's not only going to produce the new future engineers, people with that kind of background can go into all sorts of things. Has anybody ever tried to teach group learning in a classroom? you know, group projects in the classroom. So anyway, if you couldn't tell, I'm an advocate of space and education.
I'm going to sit down while I do mine. As I was introduced, I'm Jessie Clark with the San Diego Space Society. We're an all-volunteer, nonprofit organization that was formed out of a small group of space enthusiasts about 4.5 years ago in San Diego. We saw the potential for what NewSpace commercial space was going to bring to the public, and so we wanted to get involved with this kind of a movement, and we formed the San Diego Space Society with the premise of being a DIY space program. So members were encouraged to work on projects, to build events, to do things that got the rest of us involved and would get us somewhere. And out of that, there have been two very successful projects that I would like to mention. First one is something that we started about 2 years ago called the Space Travelers Emporium. So with all this commercial space tourism and the potential for the rest of us to go to space, we wanted to be there ready to provide either the tickets to go to space, the gear that you need to go to space, the training, the experience, so that everyone else could start to gear up to traveling in space. And so we opened a storefront in South Park, San Diego. It was part storefront, where we actually would sell these things, but also part activity center. The idea was that we'd also host our events, programs, workshops, and bring the public in and let them know that there is another space program besides what NASA was providing, something that they could get involved with, get hands-on. And so it's been quite a success, and we're continuing to evolve it as an opportunity to engage the public, because part of it's education, but part of it's getting people involved. And the other thing that came out of members being active in developing something is something you may have heard of already as an unconference formed based on the software industry's bar camp, and ours is called Space Up. Now this is a few of you heard of it. This is something that we started. Our first Space Up happened in 2009. It was a little unconference. It was about 100 people attending, and the difference with unconference is that unlike formal conferences where there tends to be a large audience and then there are a speaker or speakers, everybody participates. So there's a board that is a big blank, and then you decide what kind of talk you want to be involved with. You put it up on a time slot, and then anybody who's interested will join you in that breakout session, and then you have a conversation about what it is. And a lot of things come out of the unconference format. Business ideas, actions. I mean, it's been some pretty amazing things that have come out of Space Ups. And so we started with the idea of a local regional unconference, and I think the first year we ended up having 3. This is the 3rd year it's been happening, and it's been expanding. People will come to it and then take it back to their part of the country. And so this year already we've had 6 Space Ups around the country. We are set to break our own 5-year goal of having 6 within that 1-year period. And then we're also having our first European Space Up in Germany, and sometime in, I think it's September. So it's basically where everyone gets to be involved. And that's exciting. You get to meet the engineers, you get to work with people that are doing the cool things in space. And that's, for people to feel connected, that's where it's really changing the game. So it's one of the things that we're pretty happy about. If you haven't seen or heard of Space Up, feel free to talk to me or Miss Carrie Ann, who is the queen of Space Up back there. She's been to more than I have, actually, around the country. So anyway, we are really about getting our local members involved in a space program, and I think that this only needs to continue as far as getting people involved. And that's it.
I'm Benjamin Higginbotham. I'm one of the co-founders of Spacevidcast. We do live streaming of big space events. Our goal has been to get people engaged and excited about space again. I guess I'll just do a really quick story as to why we started Spacevidcast, and that's because as a kid, I loved space. I think most people as kids loved space. And then I went into middle school, and my love of space started dwindling. And that I started looking at that and said, why is this? Not at the time, later. Why was that? Well, why did it start dwindling? And that's because while there is a ton of material marketed towards children, what's marketed towards adults? How do we get people that are out of school inspired in space? You have NASA, and they do really awesome things, but oh, NASA TV. Yeah, if you ever can't sleep, turn on NASA TV. So, and that's really it. That's it for adults. There's not a whole lot else out there. There are a few things sprinkled here and there, but that's about it. And I had a background in television. I said, I think we can do better. And as I grew up, I lost all interest in space, and I was doing technology shows. I was interested in Apple. I was interested in Microsoft. What's the next iPhone going to be? You know, stuff like that. And someone brought up that they were canceling the space shuttle. And I said, can't cancel the space shuttle. I grew up with the space shuttle. It's the most amazing vehicle ever built. This is wrong. And then I got to thinking, wait, is it wrong? I grew up with the space shuttle. I wouldn't want to drive a car that was as old as a space shuttle. Then I realized I didn't know anything about the space shuttle. And so then I started researching the space shuttle. And that's where all of this came from, is I realized I think there are a lot of people like me who love space, who love the space program. I'm not anti-NASA. I'm not anti-NewSpace. I'm not anti-anything. I'm pro-space. And I realized I think we can do a great job taking some television, just basic stuff you can get off the street, and we can get out there and we can inspire people. And that's what Spacevidcast does. We're not necessarily a TV show. We're not an internet show. We're out there to inspire adults. We plenty of programming for children, awesome, but we want to get their parents inspired so that when the children go to their parents and say, hey, did you hear about such and such, they can go, yeah, and did you know this? That's what we're trying to do. Anyhow, that's Spacevidcast.
I'm going to stand up too. Hi, I'm Rick. First, want to just acknowledge, I mean, Dr. Twiggs is, I think in the long term, going to be turning out to be one of the big heroes of our cause for what he's done with CubeSats. I think that is a power to the people technology that is just amazing. And I don't think we've not heard the end of it. I think there's so much more to come from the CubeSat community. And I would go with the name CookieSat, but for the little ones. You know, and the Space Up, I love Space Up. I did Space Up. I've done it. It's a great experience. And it's awesome because you just don't know what's going to happen or what the person before you is. You know, I think one guy was talking about musical themes in movies, space movies or something, and then I'm talking this, and then somebody else, so that was cool. And then the video thing I'm just relating to was my entree to space. And this is where it kind of gets interesting to me, is that you take what skills you have and you apply them to the cause. And my entree to space was, because I had screwed around in college and I didn't have space degrees, but I was self-taught and read Robert Heinlein and Clark, so of course I knew everything. And had no degree, but I had a job as a videographer. So I called up a guy named Art Dula who was having a conference in Houston and asked him if he'd mind if I brought my camera crew down to shoot it. Why? Because I wanted to meet Robert Heinlein and hang out with astronauts. And same passion, you know, just like totally unfocused and all of that. And the next thing I know, I'm down there meeting Robert Heinlein, who I pissed off, but and meeting astronauts and stuff. And so my passion carried me. Now the question is, that we have to talk about is, how do we begin to create access for people that have that passion? And it's in an undirected form, and how do we get them involved? You know, this is something I'm doing. I'm not going to scoop it. I'm going to be talking a lot about this, the Earthlight Institute, because my job up to now has been to get the baby born, protect the baby from the bad people that want to kill the baby, but now the baby's driving the car. So we need to talk about where the baby's going. So that's what Earthlight's about, and I'll talk about that Saturday. But if I could have, how do I do this? I did PowerPoint because Dennis is with NASA, and I felt like it was just important to have PowerPoints for Dennis. Thank you. Yeah, you're the expert here, man. Anyway, here's the situation that I wanted to talk about. I think you have to do it in two phases. There's two elements to I hate to use the word activism. To me, activism, that's like Brownian motion. The molecules of water are in action, but they're just kind of bouncing off each other and going nowhere. I directed activism, revolutionary activism, whatever. But that's what I'm about. And, what happened for me was I got hooked by a big vision. During the 70s and before the 80s, we had just gone to the moon. We had probes going out into the universe. It was all big picture stuff. We could do anything. And ahead of us lay this thing called the space shuttle that was going to fly 50 times a year. And there was this period where we could do anything. We could do anything. And this is, in the middle of this, a guy named Gerard K. O'Neill, my former boss, writes a book called The High Frontier, and he talks about cities in space. And we're going to be able to build these things because it's only going to be $10 a pound to orbit, and it's just amazing. And that's when many of the space groups that you're either in now or were derived from were begun, was in the 70s, because we were going to build colonies at L5 by 1995. It was going to happen. All right, and so we had this passion, and we had this big vision. Now, what happened with me in my particular case was a little bit after that, in the early 80s, I did get involved with the Space Studies Institute. And that was because a guy named Gerard K. O'Neill gave an opportunity to a person like me who had no overt degrees or whatever. He gave me what I like to call permission to dream and allowed me to come and work out there. And suddenly, I was able to get involved. And that was what the original Space Studies Institute in its early days was about, was getting involved. We used to have a conference called the Not Ready for Primetime Conference, where you could come in and talk about crazy stuff like, someday somebody might want to mine an asteroid, that kind of stuff. There could be water on the moon, things like that, and not get laughed out of the room. So what I believe we have to do to increase activism is we have to present a powerful vision. To me, that vision is human settlement of space and the carrying of life to worlds now dead. I don't think there's anything more powerful than those two, as far as the human race goes and life. So we go big, and that's this grand vision. We go deep into the spiritual heart of humanity, what it is that we're about. Things that transcend whether you're an engineer, scientist, a farmer, working a gas station, on a production line, whatever, that transcend all aspects of what it is to be human and reach deep inside of you and inspire you and excite you. And then we go wide. We create a message that is applicable and easily understandable by the widest possible audience. I believe that if you do speak to those approaches, something grand and exciting that reaches into your heart, and you make it understandable for the maximum number of people, then what you're doing is creating access to what it is you're doing for the maximum number of people. So out of a room like this, 3 or 4 will step forward. Now, to make it credible, to make it real, we have to have a direct relationship to the vision. So I'm not going to sell you on, we're going to go to space and we're going to go settle the solar system or settle the universe, and you have to fund my pet project over here, which maybe puts a couple of jobs into my neighborhood but doesn't really take us there. Okay? You can't do bait and switch. You've got to keep an alignment with what it is. The yellow brick road really has to go to Oz. Okay? It can't go to Des Moines. Nothing against Des Moines if anybody is from there. I love Des Moines.
Kansas was okay.
I flew over it once. What?
Kansas would have been fun.
Kansas is great, yeah. And that's good. But and then tangible near-term benefits, that's, some people call it the spin-off argument, whatever. It has to have some sort of feedback that's good for you right now. Now, that tangible near-term benefit can be a good feeling for a job well done. I got to go turn a wrench on a thing called the mass driver we were working on at SSI. And I was working with people way smarter than me, but I got to turn the wrench and be there when we hit 18 gravities of acceleration, which is enough to launch a payload from the lunar surface. That was my tangible I felt good about it. Now, later I got a paycheck. That was an even better tangible result. And made that easier to explain to my wife. You always want that one for your wife or your husband. Then, real people doing real things right now. Now, that's sort of the existence proof that we have in NewSpace right now, where you can look out the door and see real people doing real things. There are really people who are like us out there doing real things. They're building stuff, they're blowing stuff up, and they're building the next thing and blowing it up, and then eventually they're going to get into space. So you put that together, real people right now doing things that have application to our lives right now that you can sell to people anywhere that really understand it. You do that in a direct relationship that it's leading to the grand vision, and the grand vision is comprised of something that is grand, something that gets you in your heart, and something that is easily understandable by the maximum number of people. And that's how you create a movement, and that's how we get things done. And again, we call ourselves Jerry's kids. I remember, and I've said this story before to people, sitting in a bar. Back in the days, many things happened in bars. They still do. It's why we party in the foundation, by the way. Sitting in a bar with Peter Diamandis, I think Jim Dunstan, Jim Muncie was not here, several other people that were not necessarily specifically in that room at that moment. And we pledged our lives and fortunes, and this was like 85. We literally pledged with a toast our lives and fortunes to making the human expansion into space irreversible in our lifetime. One of the guys said, we'll call it the benign conspiracy. Somebody else said, that sounds like a tumor. We'll call it the benevolent conspiracy. And that happened. Now, what's really remarkable is the number of those people that are still in the movement and the people that they've spawned and brought in. Giving people permission to dream and giving it to them in a way that they can access and participate in, it's huge.
Thank you, Rick. Moderator's choice. I'm going to present a slide too. We heard about Space Up. Events are another way for people to be involved, particularly in very, very large numbers. So you've heard about Yuri's Night. You've heard about Space Up. I want to share with you a little bit about World Space Week. This was declared by the United Nations October 4th, the anniversary of Sputnik when the space age began, to October 10th, a date I think only a space lawyer would appreciate, when the first Outer Space Treaty went into effect. But it conveniently made a week, and NewSpace 3, and finally with the support of the General Assembly, it was declared as a global annual event. And you can see pictures from Obama to China to kids flying in zero-G. Let me show you the next slide, give you a sense of the scale of this event. In the last 5 years, it's been held in 97 countries with 3,000 events, 1.5 million people, and media impressions off the scale, 1/3 billion. This is just what was reported, and there are probably many other things that didn't happen, that weren't reported. When many events are held in a common time frame, there's this synergy that happens from the synchronization. Earth Day did this to the environmental movement. And suddenly, folks basically had leverage. They had an amplifier. It was called the media. And so many events scattered throughout the year, they reach an audience. But many events squeezed into a narrow period of time, they reach an audience who attends plus an audience who hears about it through the media. So this is what Yuri's Night's about. This is what World Space Week's about. And so it's another opportunity for people to participate and to democratize space. So anyway, that's the end of my commercial on that. So we've heard today many things. Launching satellites, being involved in local societies, Space Up, the great work Ben is doing in publicizing space to adults. And as Rick said, there's so many things we can all do as advocates. Let me just do a quick show of hands. Who has lobbied their congressman, either in person or by a letter, or written a letter to the editor, or in a blog of your views of space? Raise your hand. Okay, excellent. Who's built a small sat or helped launch a little bit at least of space hardware? Especially the guy down here. Who's attended Yuri's Night, World Space Week, Space Up? Oh my gosh, all right. Who hasn't? That would have been an easier question. Who's formed a space organization, a business, nonprofit? Wow. I know you formed several. How many? Do you have enough fingers even to count? All right. So you can see there are so many ways to get involved, and what we need to do as the foundation and as the space community is spread these ways and think of more ways to let people know that space is theirs, that there are many ways to get involved. If you can fly, that's great, but if you can't, there are still many, many alternatives. Maybe a question for Bob. How do we get more people involved in small satellites all the way down to the cookie sats? Are the big issues lowering the price of a launch? What are some of the obstacles you see?
Well, I think are you on now? Oh, okay. I think one of the things is that I feel, at least to get parents involved, is you get their kids involved. Their kids are more apt to be interested first, and one of the things that we're actually doing in Kentucky, nobody thinks about space in Kentucky. They call it, an oxymoron, but actually we got space in Kentucky. We have a program where we work with the high schools that they get dual credit. And so once we get the high school kids involved, then the parents are involved, and then the relatives are involved. And so we're trying to help the education system by spreading it that way. And we're having programs where actually we bring small kids in and have them build things with their hands. And that seems to be the big drawing thing, is to actually build things with their hands and advertise that. And I think if we can initiate that more throughout the country and maybe establish a national goal that we would like to have at least one school in every county in the United States, high school, student have an opportunity to put something in space that they worked on as a goal, and that way it would start spreading. But to me, the best asset that we've got that we can use right now is what Pete Warden said, is the ISS. Because I see these little things I call moonbeams. I see you could launch them from something that come off of there or a supply ship. Students would really be involved in space because of something that they built. We don't litter space because that's going to come down real quick. It's going to decay down real quick. And just going through that process, I think it will start. You can't get excited about something unless you participate in it personally. And so that's my feeling, is we get to the public through the kids.
Very good. Now, Ben, you're taking the other approach. You're reaching out to the adults primarily, and
yeah, you got to hit it at both sides.
And
right? If you
some
only do the kids, then they're going to do what I did, and they're going to grow out of it, as it were.
Right.
And if you only do the adults and you don't hit the kids, then we're all going to die eventually, and then no one's left. So you have to hit both sides of it.
Is there some trickle down? In other words, once the parents are infected, do they?
It's
they
both
get
ways.
the kids involved?
There's trickle up, so the kids can inspire the
good.
parents, and the parents can inspire the kids.
Jessie, let's think. So let's think of a question for this unpanel here. Now, this model that you have with the Space Up, that is very innovative and disruptive, and can that be replicated on a larger scale? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it is a unique format. It definitely is organic. I mean, you attend this thing because of all the people that are going to be there, because it's a published, attendees are published. So you go there because you're going to meet people from SpaceX or engineers from X-Corps or writers from this website. The idea is that you come there with some ideas, and then you basically just start populating the times chart. And it's one of those things where it works fairly well if it's sort of a smaller, more intimate group. I mean, somewhere between probably 100 and 200 is the max as far as large as you want to get. Because then there's a logistical issue with trying to orchestrate that kind of chaos, because because it can get pretty crazy. I mean, we've done really well up to about 150 in size, but that's enough to get everyone active in a lot of topics to participate in.
Rick, I'm going to regret asking you this question, but I'll do it anyway. What can NASA do to allow space to be more participatory, more democratized?
You know, it's ironic, the legacy we got from NASA is inspiring, and yet the legacy is about an elite few. And that needs to begin to shift. The idea that NASA is going to do it for you is one that needs to shift. Rather, what we need is a NASA who sees itself as enabling. And you're starting to see that. I don't think you're seeing it enough. I don't think you're seeing it fast enough. But I think the idea of bringing people in to participate in different ways. You know, it's not so much NASA. I'm finding NASA's trying to do it, but higher up when you get to Congress. You know, there was a very disturbing statement made at one point during some recent stuff, obscure stuff in Washington, where a congressman said, Congressman Wolf, said, I'm going to get in trouble, I'll go all the way. But a guy named Congressman Wolf was talking about how they quickly wanted to skip over and get down to sort of like one provider for the space station, one transportation provider. And he literally said, I'm quoting badly, but he literally said something along the line of, our job is not to create a commercial space industry, our job is to get a vehicle system together to carry NASA payloads to the space station. We have to reverse or shift the conversation so that the conversation is about opening space, not supporting a government bureaucracy to open space for us. And until we shift that top-level conversation, all the decisions, that congressman's not a bad guy or anything, he's just operating within a paradigm that says, we the people are here to serve, we the people in the form of our commercial companies or activities are here to serve NASA, as opposed to the other way around. It shouldn't be a showboating exercise for NASA to host launches of CubeSat. By the way, I've heard that there's a private company that's going to be doing it for $60K. Yeah, we can talk afterwards about that. But you're stuck with the ISS inclination, but yeah, it'd be $60K. But the idea of it shouldn't be some circus type event that we're hosting private citizens or students or this or that. I was writing something down. You mentioned the gas can. Maybe NASA should require or put an incentive in, maybe not a requirement, but an incentive that all private carriers to the space station provide the equivalent of a gas can for students' participation. You know, they can use the power of the purse and the power of dominance that they have to open space.
It's like a small business set aside. In this case, you're setting aside some payload capacity for student experience.
For students, right. In the fairing there, where there's, where they've got the extra room and that kind of thing. I mean, it's a matter of changing the orientation to we are here to serve you, you are not here to serve us. So.
Very good, excellent. We want to open it up for questions. I have a question for the audience. What can we do to increase public involvement in space? So you can either answer my question or you can ask a question of our panel. And we have a couple mics. Can we get the first mic over here?
No, because webcast.
Okay. Now, NASA Ames has a project for space settlement design where kids around the world design space settlements, they send them to NASA, we judge them, and then they're invited to come to ISDC, the NSS big conference, and about 1,000 kids participated, 280 came to ISDC. Here's the thing that maybe some of you have some insight into. Almost all those kids were from India and Romania. Hardly any from the US. Quite a few participate from the NSS, but not that many come to ISDC. So in other words, they won't get in their car and drive a couple hundred miles, and I've got 120 kids from India hopping on a plane and getting visas. Any idea why that is? Because we have never been able to figure it out.
Who'd like to comment on that?
The only thing, I don't have an answer, but I will say one interesting factoid when you look at Spacevidcast numbers is that less than half of our audience comes from the US. So a good chunk of people outside of the U.S. are interested in space as well, and they're hungry. Why we ourselves are not going to the conferences and putting forth the very little amount of energy it takes, that I don't know.
I could make another Des Moines joke. Like, I'd rather go to India to a conference than to Des Moines, or Romania, which would be cool. But it is interesting. We have this real irony where Americans on the surface seem so jaded about the space program, and yet where's all the new space occurring? It's here in the United States. So I think that there's maybe it's broad versus specific. That in a broad sense, culturally, we're a bit jaded by it. The reality of space, too. We had a guy at one point we gave an award to in the Foundation for Babylon 5. And he came and he was in an interesting state at the time, but he leaned across the podium and said, "I'm the guy you have to beat, not NASA, because I make space looks way cool, and what you got doesn't look cool." It's that kind of thing. So maybe we're a little bit jaded about the reality of it, where to them, coming over here to America with a program, that's glamorous. I don't know how you get across that, though. I mean, it's a really interesting question.
Yeah, and I found in our World Space Week experience, too, space sizzles around the world. Every year in Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries on the planet, I get videos, thousands of kids march through the jungle wearing little World Space Week hats and holding World Space Week signs, and they have a big space rally and speakers. They have no space program, but they still love the promise that space has, and many developing nations really do. Here, perhaps, we won the moon race, so okay, we're already great, we know that, So I think there is kind of, I don't know if jaded is the right word, but still, what we need to do is overcome that and find ways to excite people about space. Can we have the microphone over to this gentleman in the blue shirt?
Well, actually, I think one of your panelists had a comment first.
Can I make a comment?
Oh, I'm sorry.
One of the things that I found very interesting is this program that we have that we work with high school students with a dual credit program. They get both university credit and high school credit for taking a class that I teach in space systems and satellite designs. The high school students are so much more enthusiastic than the freshmen that are in our university. I can't believe the difference. And I think it's the idea that they get to, like the country coming or something, they get to do something that they don't normally get to do, and they really get recognized for it. And I think if we could do more of that, I think we would see more interest in space, and it's getting down to the kids. It's the kids that are really, go to a 4th grade or a 5th grade class, and it's so much fun. These kids are, it's hard to keep their hand down. Go to a 7th grade class, and you get a few questions. Go sometimes to a high school class, and they're all brain dead. But the ones that take these classes, especially want to take it, are really fun to teach. And if any of you get an opportunity, or art teachers, I love the high school students. And when they come to our university and get to see some of the equipment we've got and things that we're involved in, they get more excited. So it's a difference in perspective of what you get to do, what comes to you easy, I guess.
Who's given a talk to students? Raise your hand. Okay. Go ahead.
So kind of a comment based on that, and actually sort of taking off what you're saying, is that in a lot of other countries, the stuff that we take for granted is the stuff they want. So they honor technologists, they honor engineers, the folks that can make the things that make life better for them. We take it for granted. What we need to do, and I think the answer is to get people when they're young and get them excited about this stuff. We need to let people know that geek is chic.
That'll be next year's banner. You'll see it. You heard it first, right here. Lady in the green.
Regarding suggestions, I have one which probably is impossible, but I'll still say it. Maybe making NASA less political, both internally and externally. But the second one, and it's based on personal experience, it relates to what I heard before, is allowing people to dream. And I really feel that the hierarchical and almost military structure of NASA is detrimental to allowing people to dream. Sometimes and very often, you have a box that's defined and you have to stay within that box. And if you have an idea in a different field or in a different area where you're not supposed to be thinking in that area, you're not listened to. And that's one thing that definitely, I think it's detrimental. And I can compare the business model of NASA with SpaceX, where I see that there's more uniformity, right? I mean, if you have an idea, you go and you talk to the right group. They put people with different backgrounds in the same room, and amazing things come out of that.
And those two models can coexist. I mean, we've showed that on the COTS program of, NASA has a need to run the big space station, and smaller companies can be innovative and fill that need. So the whole ecosystem of different companies and organizations can coexist. I think.
All I'm saying is that I think NASA still has tremendous technical and intellectual capital, but it's not always being used.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, let's go back here.
One of the problems with democratizing space and why Americans don't get more involved, I think, stems from how Hollywood makes science fiction purely fictional. And on the other side of the fence, NASA makes the science behind it so dry as to be inconsumable by the general public. And so perhaps if NASA did outreach to Hollywood, we may actually get somewhere. Because the pop culture, well, maybe Hollywood needs to do outreach to NASA then. But then why are these science fiction films so fantastically and wildly inaccurate?
Not everyone wants to talk to each other.
Rick, you've done some work with Hollywood, right?
A little bit. It is a blank. I mean, the idea of NASA TV. I mean, I'm going to badly quote, because that's what I do, a friend of mine who, a few years ago, one of our English accented friends who's not here, who went in and was part of a consortium that was going to try and privatize NASA TV at one point, and was literally told by the head office person, they came in and said, we're going to make it exciting. And the guy said, well, you can't ride in here on your white horse and try and make it exciting. We like it dull. I mean, that was literally said, according to my friend. And now, on the flip side, looking to a bureaucracy to be exciting is sort of, oxymoronic. And maybe that's not what we should be doing. But on the other hand, what NASA can do, and I got to tell you, things like, sending probes to Mars, Hubble, Galileo, those kinds of things, they're awesome, right? I mean, I remember Bob Zubrin and I came together to try and save Hubble when they were going to, decommission it and all this. And it really doesn't have a lot to do specifically with either one of our agendas. I mean, it's cool to look at things. But we did it because it's cool, because it excites people. Now, that's a realm that NASA can do and do very, very well. So, don't cancel the really cool stuff. Go do that. Quit trying to drive trucks. Go do the really exciting stuff that none of us are going to be able to go do with our private money right now. Do stuff that gives a cultural return rather than an economic return. Do that well, then create the mechanisms for us to be able to stitch in and bring along the kids who are, they're just seeing footage coming back from Mars or from a probe that's leaving the solar system, and they're launching their cookie set or whatever you want to call it themselves. Now they're hands-on, now they're tied to a big vision, and then leave the driving and the truck driving and the house cleaning and stuff to us. So.
Ben, how do we make space more sexy to the media viewing public?
Well, I was going to say, why does it have to be NASA? There was a moment of pure awesome in Falcon 9 Flight 3 where you saw the reverse shot looking through the glass of mission control, and the look of the faces of not just the controllers, but everyone behind him cheering and screaming, and just, it was raw humanity and emotion at that moment. And you could just feel everyone attached to that moment. That wasn't NASA, that was SpaceX. And it doesn't have to be SpaceX. It can be anyone doing something even much smaller than that accomplishment in space. It doesn't have to be NASA. It can be anyone in this room. It can be anyone watching. If it's your hobby of just launching little rockets, you can do some pretty cool, exciting moments with that, and you can make that exciting. It's not hard to do. You just have to be willing to do it. Make it your hobby.
If you launch a kitten on your home-built rocket and put it on YouTube.
Yes, 1 million views right there, 100 million.
There you go.
By the way, I'm claiming rights to that.
Can a kitten fit in a small sat? No, never mind. Any animal rights?
Don't show
animal
the
rights
aftermath.
people. I'm sorry. All right. The ecosystem would be a challenge. We have, Bruce.
Yeah, one of the last times I gave one of those talks, it was a while ago, but I was talking about the most far out stuff that we were talking about, and you know me, Dennis, I deal with some fairly far out stuff, but I was talking to a science fiction convention, and they were just, but where's warp drive? Where's Beam Me Up Scotty? And the kinds of stuff that we were talking about was so mundane compared to what they are. So that's part of the challenge. It's much easier to write something in a script, especially when you can do another take. One of the problems with launching a Falcon 9 or any other rocket is you don't get to take another take if it doesn't work out really good. And if you've ever watched, like, I remember back in the old days when Roddenberry used to come around and show the blooper reel of Star Trek when Captain Kirk just smacks into the doors because they don't open, because there was just 2 guys on the side that were supposed to pull it open and they didn't get the cue or something like that. So even in Star Trek they had their problems, but that's what people expect, and no matter what broke on the Enterprise, Kirk could fix it. He never looked at a manual. He never had to take a training course. He just knew how everything, and he knew which wire it was. Right. Why? Because somebody had given him a script. So that's part of it. And I think Dr. Twiggs has part of the answer here. If you get the kids involved and they actually understand how the technology works, so it's not just black magic, it's not just, somebody out there knows how to do these things and it ain't me, but I just expect these things to happen. If you can actually understand how some of this stuff works, and instead of just watching the fantasy, if you can actually help participate in the reality, I think that's part of the solution there, is to get the people that instead of watching it, that you actually get to participate in doing it. And I think that now that's an option that didn't exist for many of us that have gray hair. And I think it's great.
The idea, too, of and it's just, I hammering home on some vision-based and technically correct types of things that we are excited about. That's another thing. Sometimes I run into this with NASA and others. And it's like, I don't want to be too excited. I don't want to get too far out there. No, get far out there. If you've got the reality behind you, get the hell far the hell out there. I mean, excite them with it. Don't hide on it. By the way, Hollywood's very interesting. We did a documentary series at one point we were trying to sell, and it was called Space Race, and it may be back, but we took it around about 3 years ago, my friends at NewSpace and we showed it, and we had Armadillo, Maston, and I've showed a clip, I think, at one of these conferences, and we were showing 3 teams that were roughly, we took it into Discovery at the time, and some other shows, some other networks, and they said, come back to us after it's happened. Because apparently they have a magic Wayback Machine that you could go back and learn how it happened afterwards. The other point that they made to us was that it was too slow. See, I got really upset because a friend of mine works on a thing called Storage Wars or something like that. And what he pointed out to me is, see, in those shows, there's a payoff every hour. It may only be finding that you've opened a box full of mothballs that you just bid $500 for that storage room. But there's a payoff in a short time span. Our time spans are longer, so we have to understand that. We're not going to get to that level. So we have to pitch in different ways. And again, I think going for the big vision, but tying it into reality-based, hands-on activities like that is good. Last point, I understand there's a movie coming out this fall that is going to be somewhat vision-based and technically correct. It's called Gravity. And it sounds like it's going to be, maybe, don't quote me, but I think it may be pretty awesome. George Clooney and Sandra Bullock. So,
interesting combination. Let me ask a question. Jessie, you're the founder and president of the San Diego Space Society. Local activism, local space organizations. You know, we talked about the L5 days and so on. What's the trend? Or is the availability of space information through the internet, is it causing people to be less interested in forming local space groups, or is there more interest in forming space groups, or is it steady state?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'm finding that people want to get into organizations, at least locally, because it's a community. There's a lot of information on the internet about what's going on, and so sometimes we have to educate people that only peripherally look at things. But a lot of times, people want to come together because, in our case at least, that they want to work on projects, they want to be involved, and they want the community that comes with that. And that's really what we are focused on, is building a local space community that together we can do a lot more than we could as individuals. So I think I'd like to see that continue, actually.
Okay, good point. All right, yes, sir.
Say, Al, back to your question about how many people were involved with ISDC from throughout the world. In San Diego, I managed to get a hold of about, 40 teachers that are graphics art teachers, and over 200 students submitted logos for ISDC next year. So the awareness, I think that is key. When you're dealing with students, you're talking about social media, that they're saturated with Facebook, Twitter all the time. How do you peel through that? How do you drill into that and get them aware of what's going on in space? I meet students all the time that think it's totally inaccessible. They're unaware of what's going on in the new space sector. So it's a matter of using whatever you have, whatever communication you have available to peel through all the saturation they're dealing with right now. And I have a question also. Right now, I've heard comments about space being the new billionaires club. You know, we're going to build this infrastructure. Who's going to get to go? Who can afford to go? So that sets up a class structure that would only allow a certain segment of the population to go. And I think there's going to be a whole service sector around that as well, which will open up for the masses. But do you see a class structure forming? Is that what's going to drive exploration?
Who's willing to go to space to be the janitor for the billionaires? Raise your hand. Okay, all right, all right. Any comments on answers? Class warfare in space, is that good or bad?
Yeah, first of all, on the activism and the community stuff, the term I use is a movable church. The space community is a movable church. We are doing this not because anybody in this room is making scads of money. We do it because we have a belief. It comes from here. That's why we're here. I know I saw Henry earlier. I was at Space Access Society, Henry's great conference, which I heavily recommend, by the way, if you want to go hang out with the doers and the metal benders. And I asked everybody, I said, how many of you people got it? I'm going to paraphrase. How many of you people were here because you have a totally logical, sensical business plan that's going to make you a profit in the near term? And I think 2 people raised their hand. One was Randall Clegg from X-Corps, who was just screwing with me, and the other guy was too new to know what he was talking about. Nobody else raised their hands because they know that they're doing this because it's a belief-driven activity. And I think what we have to do is continue to give opportunities for people who maybe haven't found their way into that approach, because belief is what's going to take us through the first deaths, the first things like that. Create opportunities for people to participate and get together, because when you go home from this conference and you start talking about the Delta V's or what's involved in this payload or this, their eyes roll back in there. What the hell? They don't get it. They don't get it. They're going to go back and watch Fox News or something. I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry. They did a good story on SpaceX just now. Anyway, the point is that we have to create the opportunity. And you know, look, we can have grand expectations about space, but don't have grand expectations that everybody on the planet. We're not going to have a 1 million-person march for space. It's not going to happen. All right? It didn't take everybody in Europe to come to this new world. It only took a few core people whose beliefs, be they religious, as in the Puritans and this, or wanting desire for gold or this or that, whatever their belief was, drove them. That's what you need. You need a core group of powerful believers. So, real quick, at the end of, when I do a talk, and I'm out there talking to students, or Kiwanis, you know, I'm talking to farmers at their lunch in Kiwanis in some small town or something, if I get 1 or 2 or 3 people who come up who are motivated enough to want to get involved, that's a home run. I don't need the whole room.
Okay, good point. Over here. You had your hand up the longest.
Hi there. So I think one of the most powerful things that can be done to access people, not who may be interested in space in general, but perhaps people who would be interested in space if it was made easy, would be to focus on lowering the engagement barriers. And I saw NASA do this really good example of that was the International NASA Space Apps Challenge. Here's a way where you can turn up to an event, join a project, help out, and at the end of the weekend, if you don't want to invest any more time, that's fine. You know, the city did a great job of this a long time ago where you could click a button, download a screensaver, and all of a sudden, when your screensaver's on, your computer is helping out city, you know, get all this data and process it and so on and so forth. I think one of the things that I see mostly from people who are going from industry, going to non-industry, is they have so much context and they understand their something that they've been passionate about and invested in so much that they lose the ability to communicate with somebody who does not have that context. So in terms of specific initiatives, being able to get right down to the granular interaction that you're having with somebody who only has 5 seconds to engage with you or not, in order to figure out whether they're going to engage with you for another 5 minutes, go to your website, check it out, what it is you're doing, in order to figure out whether they're going to engage with you in a longer term experience. Having an understanding that a lot of the people you're trying to bring into the widening of the funnel to get into space conversation, you have to communicate with them with the knowledge that they don't have the context because they don't have it. However, in the future, if they do have that context, maybe that's something they can get excited about. So understanding that on the internet, treating people is a little bit like they have ADD because they have all the rest of the internet. It's like Las Vegas. Everybody's trying to get your attention. So I think having a focus on the initiatives that you guys are doing in the future on simplifying, getting that granular interaction, something they can do in 5 seconds in order to sign up for your email address, click the like button, whatever it is to open up those communication channels so that you can engage them further. That's a smart way to go about engaging people who don't have that context.
Dennis?
Yes.
Could I say something?
Please, of course.
I want to do a little experiment here. How many of you people are really interested in space? I hope all of you. How many of you would be interested in putting your own satellite in space? How many of you think you're capable of doing it? How many of you would pay $500 to have the right to put your satellite in space? Okay.
All right.
This is a start, right? Come up and get your satellite. Next year, come up here and get your satellite and take it home with you and start studying. It doesn't take a lot. And you know, we got to make that available. We got to make opportunities. Mm-hmm. Put your fingerprint in space. It's so damn cool.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope. That's what I hope you can go out and tell people. It's so neat. If you put one of these up in space, and you were able to listen to that thing, even if it sent Morse code and it said beepy beepy beepy, all right, it's yours. And you put it in space. That's a cool thing. But what you learn in doing it, you and get a kid to go with you, what you learn is so phenomenal of all of the things that we want to teach them in school. This is a cool thing that we're doing here, and I better shut up.
You should know better than offering spacers free food.
Gentleman in the striped shirt here in the middle, please.
A lot of this kind of goes along with Bob's things. You and I have done a lot of the same stuff with STEM education, with students, and one of the quotations that comes to mind is Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson in a paraphrase. He said, "The saddest thing in life is not to forget that you ever went somewhere, it's to forget that you ever could." And right now, that's a lot with the moon. You could probably ask a second grader, did we go to the moon? And he or she would probably be like, I don't know, maybe, and not take it seriously. I think one of the biggest things for you guys, especially in the media, is to not let people forget that we ever could do something, especially right now as private space seems to be the only ones that are going to have the capabilities to take us to the next step.
Media can't help. In order to not forget, you have to keep doing it.
That's a good point. With SpaceX too and the other things, I think that's going to help. And like the fur traders and the Indian trails along the north where you can see history in the old trade routes and stuff, I think it's important too to remember the missions of Mercury and Gemini and Apollo and embellish those a lot to get people interested to say you can do it again and you can push those boundaries.
Okay, we have time just for a couple quick comments or quick questions.
Yeah,
like 1 minute. So
I said this before. The reason that people doubt we ever went to the moon is because we're not still there. If you're talking about the government role here would be if the president wanted to get up and use the bully pulpit, because we have to keep in mind, for better or worse, the American people have agreed to spend $14 billion on space. For better or worse, let's not waste it. But if you're going to set a goal, don't set it 50 years. Let's make a challenge out of it, okay? We're going to be on the moon by 2020. We're going to be on the Mars by 2030, and not to visit, but to stay. Now, that might get somebody excited a little bit. And I mean we, not NASA. We, settlements. You get to go.
Okay, one really quick question. Who's... Anybody on this side? Way in the back.
So, sort of a comment and quick question. So I do a lot of outreach events, and I don't think the problem is really with the elementary school kids. They're excited about space. How do we keep high schoolers and early college students still engaged? Because I think there's that big gap between where you're engaged as a little kid and engaged as an adult. And somehow we just lose all these engineers and all this potential talent in there. So how do we keep those people involved?
Can I comment?
Attention, go, Bob.
Again. I think one of the things that you do is you have to have a program where you start young and engage them and keep them engaged every year and not just one shot a year. I think you have to have something that keeps their attention, because if you could start in the 4th grade with kids or even earlier, and you could have a mentor, if we could form an organization that had an engineer maybe that was a mentor, and they took the 4th grade and they did 4 or 5 projects with them during the year, then that mentor could move with them to the 5th grade and into the 6th grade and know what their capabilities were. And I know that's hard because the kids split up, but boy, by the time they get up to high school, they got the background and they're roaring ready to go. If you just do this one shot thing, I think that's why we lose them.
Yeah, we got to quit, or I'll be fired. Or worse, right? Anyway, we've obviously touched on a subject that is of great interest. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all your questions, but please keep thinking about this. It's very important that we involve the public at all ages, and not just in the United States, in space in every way possible. And please, let's keep the dialogue going. I want to thank our panel, and thank you all for attending.
And I would also like to thank the online audiences who are watching right now and who joined us recently. Please keep your questions coming. We're waiting for them. In our next keynote speech, we invite Dr. George Neild, who serves